Excuse me, Prince. Sorry about this, but I have to. I'm not going to be here for one little section, and I'll tell you why. Um, a door has opened for me that I didn't see coming. You know how that goes. And I'm at the situation in my life where I say yes to everything and then I figure it out. Well, this, you aren't going to believe this because I don't believe it. It's worth waiting for. And if you'll just excuse me this time, I'll make this up to you and include you because I think it'll be fun. But at the moment, instead, there's a very special episode I would like you to pay attention to. I think you're going to enjoy it.
All right, welcome everyone to this episode of Notes with Jack. This very special episode of Notes with Jack. My name is Alan Fox. This is episode 21, and as Jack just told you, he can't be here this week, but we have a very special guest. He is the producer of over 30 films, one of them being the 2023 Amazon film Air with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. And more importantly for this episode, he is one of the producers on Highest to Lowest, the new movie coming out with Denzel Washington and Spike Lee that I wrote the screenplay for. And his name, I call him Super Producer Berman, but his full name is Jason Michael Berman. So Jason, welcome to being the first guest on the Notes with Jack podcast. How are you feeling?
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for having me. It is awesome to be the first guest on Notes with Jack, and I definitely have big shoes to fill stepping in for Mr. Jack O'Brien.
Yes.
So I'm very excited to be here.
Amazing. Yes, and Jason's also the producer on Notes with Jack and helped me put this whole thing together with Paul and Jack and Jeremiah, just the whole gang. So he's part of the crew. But so here's what we want to do today, since we can't have Jack on. But we love the idea of process here at Notes with Jack. And so we thought, like, what a great opportunity to talk about the process of Highest to Lowest. Because the film Highest to Lowest, again, Denzel Washington, Spike Lee, Jeffrey Wright, A$AP Rocky, Ilfened, like, it's coming out August the 11th in theaters, and then it'll be on streaming September the 5th. And so we figured, like, what a perfect opportunity to talk about the process of how Highest to Lowest came to be. And that process actually starts, well, this iteration of the process starts with Jason. So first, like, why don't we get into that? So, like, Berman, like, I'm just gonna start calling you Berman because that's what I always call you anyway. Tell us about how Highest to Lowest started. Like, what was that? How did you step into the shoes of Highest to Lowest? Because it's got a long story. So give us a little backstory on that.
Yeah, definitely. So back in 2019, I was on set of a movie called 9 Days that I was producing. When I got a phone call from Denzel Washington's agent, Andrew Finkelstein, at William Morris Endeavor, who I had worked with on a project called The Birth of a Nation. And Andrew called me up and he's like, I have an opportunity for you. It's a lottery ticket. He said, you know, it could turn into being something, or it could potentially just be a loss of investment. But if you play your cards right, it could be a lottery ticket. And so I said, okay, what is it? And Andrew's obviously, you know, a great agent. He's very good at selling things that he's passionate about and his clients. And so he was very good at selling this. And he's like, are you familiar with the Akira Kurasowa film High and Low? And
Yeah.
I said, yes. I said I had actually seen it at USC when I was in film school.
And just so people know that, just so people know that maybe listening, Akira Kurosawa, iconic Japanese filmmaker. Movies like Seven Samurai, movies like Rashomon. Also, though, he's kind of like do we want to call him like a massive influence on a lot of prominent American filmmakers? Like, he's not just an iconic director. It's like he has shaped the way people block actors in scenes in America.
Yes,
Go ahead.
if you watch an Akira Kurosawa film, and I would specifically say if you watch the original High and Low, that was, I believe, came out in the 1970s, you will literally get a master class in film school education in the way that Akira Kurosawa blocks, like Alan was just saying. It is the way he moves the camera, the way he blocks his scenes, the way he utilizes the camera. It's film school 101. if you want to be a director or a cinematographer. It's
Yeah.
genius. And so I remembered what the movie was about. But obviously, wanted to go back and watch it again. So I told Andrew, let me go back and watch it again. And the reason he was calling was to say that the rights, there was an opportunity to get the rights to the original High and Low. That the rights were expiring, and at the time, producer Scott Rudin who was a very prolific theater and film producer, had the rights. And they were expiring, and Scott was looking for, a party to come on and renew the rights, and ultimately, I would be joining forces to produce the movie with him. And so,
and just so people know, Scott had been developing this thing since like 1989, right? Like, didn't he originally start developing this in 1989?
Yeah, he was the first draft of the script that I am familiar with was from 1989, by David Mamet.
Okay.
I'm not 100%. I don't 100% know if that was developed by Scott or another producer, but I do know that Scott had been involved for 10, 20 years. I just don't know if it was in 1989. So that I'm unclear about, but but the development of it had been since 1989. I mean, the draft of the script we had was from early 1990, which means that it had been written in 1989.
Yeah. And also, so people know, sorry, Kurosawa based it on a novel, right? An American novel that was released in the 50s.
That's right. So there was a novel by a gentleman by the name of Ed McBain. I think that was his penmanship name. I think he may have gone by another. He had his real name was something else. But Ed McBain had written a book called King's Ransom, which had been published about 5 years before the Kurosawa movie had been made. And so so this was based on a book by an American author, adapted by Akira Kurasowa and a bunch of other writers in Japan, in Japanese, produced in Japanese language, and then ultimately got into development in the American studio system in the late 1980s.
Okay.
So it's pretty amazing, and so Scott had been developing it for a long period of time, and it was also, I think it had been developed under multiple studios. Multiple studios, I believe, had paid for screenplays on this project, but mostly Disney. Because that's where Rudin's deal was.
When Andrew pitches you something, like as a producer, as a super producer, as I like to call you, when Andrew pitches something, Andrew Finkelstein, when an agent pitches you something that's been in development since 1989, based on a foreign film, based on a novel before it, as a producer, is that an exciting prospect, or is it like, something's broken here? Like, I don't think a lot of people understand that process.
I think a lot of people may look at it as though it's a broken prospect. I looked at it as an opportunity, but I think that's also just the way I look at things. It's like if something's been, if something feels like it has a lot of potential but hasn't been done yet, then to me that feels like there's an opportunity. Whereas to some people that may feel like, that's just, it's not working. And for me, I like to figure things out. I was the kid growing up that liked to put together, computers and editing machines and race car tracks without, reading instructions. So, I like to do things. I'm dyslexic, I think, in a non-linear way. And I like putting the pieces of the puzzle together, especially for things that are challenging. So that actually excited me. One of the things that Andrew also said was, so basically what he said was, the option's $150,000. So you're gonna have to find someone to put up $150,000.
Is that a lot?
Get the rights.
Just for people that don't, is that a lot in Hollywood? I know, like, sometimes you'll hear book options go for $1 million. Like how does that rank for something like that?
I mean, to be honest with you, everything that I had optioned up until that point, whether it was a book or an article or a movie, had been for $10,000 to $20,000. And just so the audience knows, an option's not a purchase. An option means that I'm getting the rights to potentially make something over a certain period of time.
Sure.
But when it does get made, then there's a larger sum of money that's actually paid.
Sure.
So the option's giving you the rights
Yeah.
for a certain period of time. Now, the rights for this were for 18 months.
Yeah.
And they also then had, there was also an extension on it, I believe, for another 12 months.
Okay.
So anyway, we ended up, I rewatched the film. I loved it. It was an opportunity to work with, Mr. Rudin, who had actually interviewed to be his assistant prior, like about 20 years prior.
His time is a circle, as we love to say on Note Switch Jack.
His time is a circle, and keep in mind this was 2019, and so Scott was making incredible movies with A24, and so amazing theater, and so I saw this as an incredible opportunity, and I loved the movie when I rewatched it. So I spoke to a friend of mine. His name is Matthew Linder, of Juniper Productions, who's now my partner in my new company, Vantage Pictures. And Matt had helped finance a lot of films that I had done in the past. He helped finance Birth of a Nation. He helped finance Jonas Carpignano's Mediterranea, Ed Sonoda's 9 Days, which was the film I was on the set of when I got this call about this opportunity. And so I called Matt up and I said, "Are you familiar with this film?" And he said, "Yeah, I think I've heard of it." And I said, "Well, it's Akira Kurasowa." Of course, he knew who Akira Kurasowa was, and he had seen his film. So Matt went and watched the film too.
Yeah.
And I said to Matt, "Matt, so here's the thing. We have to put up $150,000 ASAP to get the rights. The issue is that there's probably over $10 million in previous script costs and rights acquisitions costs from the late 1980s to where we are right now in 2019.
Just so people know when they're listening, right? What that kind of means, like in layman's terms, is you have to pay $150,000 to get the opportunity to further develop these scripts. But also, in the past 20 years or whatever, there have been $10 million paid to a number of writers who we may talk about in a second to write a draft of this script for various studios, for Scott Rudin, for all these people. So it's like there's a book in America in the 50s. There's a Japanese movie. Then there's 20 years of scripts totaling to over $10 million. So that's got to be hard to go to Matt and be like, "Hey, Matt, good news. We got the chance to get this Akira Kurosawa project. Bad news. A lot of people have struck out."
Right. And there's also going to be a lot to clean up.
Yeah.
And here's the thing.
Yeah, that's okay.
And here's the thing. The thing is, a lot of people would not go and put up $150,000 without it all being cleaned up. Right?
Huh. Yeah.
The problem was we didn't have the time to clean it up. By the time that this opportunity came to me, it was like 2 weeks left on the option before it was expiring.
Yeah.
You can't clean up 20 plus years of chain of title issues with a screenplay.
Yeah.
That it takes deals with studios, etc. So that was the lottery ticket aspect of this, right? Was that like there's an opportunity, but you're signing up and putting $150,000 into a bucket, and there's a chance that bucket can bloom, and there's a chance that what's in that bucket is just going to be set on fire, right?
Yeah.
And so because who would have known if we would have been able to even clean up all the rights?
Yeah.
So we took the chance.
But the jackpot is a Denzel Washington movie. So you
But
say, Matt, listen, man, have you seen Training Day? We got a shot at this.
Exactly. Because what I'm also leaving out here is what Andrew had said to me when he called me was he said, "This is always a character that Denzel has been interested in because it's a morality tale."
Yeah.
And it's this perfect combination between being a commercial movie and a prestige movie.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting character, and Denzel's always been fascinated by the movie and the character. And so if you end up getting a great script out of this, it's something that Denzel's always been interested in. So that was also the selling point to Matt, right?
Yeah,
it was not only is there the opportunity to remake this great movie, but if we get a brilliant writer and we get a brilliant script and it's fresh, which the other screenplays that had been developed really weren't fresh, in my opinion, over the prior 20 years, this is something that would excite Denzel Washington. And that also obviously means a lot, right? That's like that was a big part of the selling point too.
Yeah.
So Matt said yes. And we then spent, I kid you not, the next 2.5 to 3 years dealing with a renegotiation of that rights deal because we were
Hmm.
extending it, but also having to change some of the terms because the business has changed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Streamers came into play.
Huh.
So
Yeah, yeah.
we had to spend the next 2.5 to 3 years negotiating with the Kurosawa estate
Yeah.
through an American attorney who also speaks Japanese.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with Japanese companies, and estates,
Yeah.
things take a long time. Like you
Yeah.
would send a red line of the agreement over to Japan and it
Yeah.
would take months to get back.
Yeah.
Things don't move quickly in regards to legal agreements over there like they do
This
here.
is the sexy
So,
part of Hollywood that no one likes to talk
right.
about. Yeah.
Yeah. So me and this guy by the name of Chris Bauman, who was Matt Linder's attorney, and Jeff Heinbaugh, Matt Linder's attorney, we literally spent the next 2 to 3 years negotiating this rights deal.
Yeah.
Now,
When you're doing that, sorry, when you're doing that, right? The because that's a long time to be doing. I mean, I guess like you're built for it, right? Like this is what you do. You know, a lot of people don't know this. This is a lot of what a producer does, particularly at a very high level in Hollywood, right? It's like making these deals work with everyone, like clearing up chain of title type stuff. Like that's what a major Hollywood producer does. When you're doing this though, is the North Star like, do you ever lose faith that like, oh, we're not gonna like, do you remember a moment when you were like, you know what, like this, Matt, like you got to call Matt and be like, hey man, like it's not looking great? Or are you always like North Star is training day 2.0, like we're gonna get there,
No, I felt like we were going to get there. There was
Cool. Yeah.
nothing there was nothing. There was no major craziness that we were dealing with here. It
Hmm.
was just making sure that like things were buttoned up,
Sure.
and that also, by the way, even though we couldn't clean up the chain of title with the other studios that had scripts based off of this movie,
Yeah.
we needed to understand the full picture of what it was.
Yeah.
And so we had to go through that process too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's part of why it took so long. But then also it took a long time because, again, things in Japan just take longer in
Yeah.
terms of business contracts.
Yeah. Gotta give
Um,
time.
and you got to give time. So ultimately, what happened was that took a lot of time to accomplish, and then in the middle of that entire process of closing the rights, Scott Rudin had stepped off of the film, and then I had the opportunity to really kind of run with it, now
Hmm.
as really kind of the main producer. And but one of the things that that Scott had done, prior to stepping off, was that he had gotten A24
Hmm.
excited about the movie,
Hmm.
and he had also helped to clean up a lot of the chain of title stuff with Disney,
Yeah.
which was amazing. I'm extremely grateful to Scott for doing that, because only somebody like Scott Rudin with his track record could do something like that.
Sure.
And so Scott played a big role in paving the way to be able to clear that chain of title up, and also getting a company that A24, who was doing great work, but also starting to grow in the types of movies that they were making and the size budgets, etc., excited about the movie.
Yeah.
So Scott did a lot of great work there. So then what happened was, it was now, time to, start, looking at, screenwriters to write the script with, and to work on the adaptation. And also, simultaneously to that, it was Andrew had called me up and said, now that Scott's not on the film, I think it would be good for you to partner with another producer who's made really big movies, because
Yeah.
up to this point in 2019 I had only made up to $20 million films.
Yeah.
And so he's like, what about Todd Black? And I was like, I love Todd Black.
Yeah. As do I.
Todd Black is a prolific producer. He's worked with Denzel on most movies that Denzel has done, including all the Equalizer movies, and he
Yeah.
produced Denzel's directorial debut, Antoine Fisher. And so Todd, when he brought that up, I said, that's amazing. I said, Todd was the first person I interned for back in my fall semester of my
Yeah.
freshman year at USC at Escape Artists.
And why?
And
But
then
why? Because time is a circle. So we're
because
back.
time is
Okay.
because time
So
is a
time is a
circle,
circle. All right.
and then to further the time is a circle thematics and metaphor, um, Todd Black was also the president of Mandalay Pictures,
Which is where you
which
were with this movie.
is where I was.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Okay.
so so it was really wild because now I was partnering with someone who not only was the first person I ever interned for and loved his movies,
Yeah,
not only I had and then I also had the same job as he did. The
yeah,
other good news was Todd has a great relationship with Peter Guber, who's a mentor of mine and who I worked for at Mandalay because, Todd and I both worked for Peter, who's the chairman of Mandalay Pictures.
yeah,
So Todd got involved in the project, because again, we were developing something for Denzel, and Todd has a great relationship with Denzel.
yeah.
So then Todd and I had to go on the journey of finding a writer, and I went to Todd, and I said to him, I believe this was in the fall of 2021, and I said to Todd, there's this brilliant writer who I've gotten to know over the last 3 years since 2018. His name is Alan Fox. He's these are the things that he's written, the screenplays he's written. He wrote this great play called Safe Space that Jack O'Brien directed. And I had just worked with Alan on this project called The Black Cyclone that he did a brilliant job on. And I was away with Alan, and we were talking about other things that we could work on together. And I brought up High and Low and pitched it to him. And Alan had obviously knew who Akira Kurasowa was. He went and watched the movie, and he thinks he has a really cool, interesting take that could be set within the music world of New York City. And that feels topical. It feels current. There was a lot going on with music at the time, and I said, Todd, I think he's cooking something up, and then Alan came and pitched myself and my executive Jordan his take, and we worked through it a little bit, and then Alan ultimately pitched Todd, and Todd
And
loved
I
it.
had known Todd. I had worked with Todd before, and we had done it. And I remember when you brought me the idea, I remember very clearly thinking, I have no idea what this movie is. And what you told me was, you said it's about a guy and his driver. And I had had an experience in the music business where I got close with a very high profile record label's driver, like a high profile A&R. So, and I was thinking about like, oh, okay, there's Denzel, there's the music business, like he can be this guy. And I remember like saying that back to you. And I remember talking about Nipsey Hussle in our first
Yeah.
conversation, the rapper, because I was always infatuated by this idea of how he passed away. And so that's what I remember about you first bringing it up to me. And then I remember going to watch it. I remember going to reading it. And then then we get into it. We go to Todd. I remember pitching to Todd, Jordan, all that stuff. You guys helping develop the take.
Yeah, and then ultimately we got super excited by Alan's take, and the treatment pages that he had put together, and we went to A24, who was really excited about the possibility of this movie, and they heard Alan's take, and they said, let's do it. And simultaneously to that, we had to set up the rights for the remake and transfer the rights over to A24. So they
Yeah.
went from Mandalay and Juniper to A24.
Do
And
you remember
then
at this
A20.
point, sorry, not to cut you off. Do you remember at this point, was it ever mentioned to Denzel? Like I'm trying to remember. Did Todd mention it to Denzel that like, hey, it may be set in the music business from your side of it? Like, what was that conversation like? Do you remember?
I do. I know that Andrew and Todd had talked about it, and I'm sure that in passing they had said something to Denzel that they were working on this, and that
Yeah,
it was set in the music business,
yeah,
and then but in probably in the Denzel way is like, well, when you have a script, send it to me,
yeah, yeah,
um, and uh, and so I think they definitely kept Denzel abreast of the fact that they were still working on this,
yeah. But still, I
and
mean, another thing, man, you were like really, I remember you were really pushing for me because that's what I always tell people is you really went to bat for me with this movie and to say it because like, let's talk a little bit about the history of these scripts, right? It's like there was multiple David Mamet versions. There was a Chris Rock version. There was, we talk about this on the Notes with Jack, episode with Jack about Mike Nichols. Mike Nichols wanted to make this movie. There was a Scorsese take on it that had been done. Like Scott Rudin and the studios prior to this had gone to a who's who of
Yeah.
Hollywood elites, right? And so you then came in the door and said, look, there's this unproduced screenwriter who dreams of one day starting a podcast with this 86-year-old theater director. We should give him a shot
Right.
talking about the hip hop music
Yeah.
setting. Like, it's got to be an interesting conversation. Do you
And
remember what that was like? Like,
yeah, and
what
it
was it
was
like going to that?
yeah, I mean, I had to pitch Todd, like hard on Alan, like the work that he had done on the script that we had done with him, and the fact that he, lived in New York and understood the music scene, and I thought was just an absolutely brilliant writer and somebody that was also just a pleasure to work with. And so yeah, like it was you have to get in our industry, the way you make things happen is you get really passionate and you have a lot of perseverance, and you don't let people say no. And it's got to be yeses, and as Peter Guber would say, it's like, to him, no meant on, not no.
Yeah.
It meant on. And
Yeah.
so it was, I always had to be
Wait,
on, and I
wait,
was like, and it
say that
was,
one more time. I love that, actually.
it's never no, it's
Yeah.
on.
Oh,
So
okay. I love that. Yeah.
yeah, so it is. I was really passionate that since, I had the rights and saw the opportunity in this, that I wanted to do it with somebody who I really believed in as a writer, and that I thought had a really interesting point of view, and also had an experience in his past that spoke to, what this movie was ultimately going to be about, which to me was the exciting aspect of being set in the music scene in New York, which is,
Yeah.
which you had done and where you were living.
Yeah.
And so the good news was Todd got excited and bought in. And then also, obviously, he had read some of your past work. He had worked with you on something too in the past. And then ultimately it was our job as producers to, get the studio to sign off, because the
Yeah.
studio ultimately was going to be the one, hiring you to write the script, because they were taking the rights over from me to the remake. And we were working with the studio executive, Noah Sacco, and I'll never forget, Noah said to us, he's like, yeah, we think Alan's really cool and there's a lot of potential there. But we're also really backing, you, Jason, and you, Todd, and your belief in Alan, and that he's going to deliver, which I think is a great part of that. That's the ethos of that studio, is they really
Yeah.
get behind backing people.
Yeah.
And so they were backing us, and therefore backing you. Um, and and so then Alan went off to write the screenplay,
Yeah.
and you can talk, Alan, about that process of writing the screenplay, but ultimately you delivered something that was extraordinary, and it was given to Denzel by his agent, and his agent called me. It was a couple days after President's Day weekend, and he said Denzel read the script this weekend, and he called me up, and he told Andrew. He said, "You did it."
Yeah.
Talking to Andrew,
Well,
like, because
Andrew has told me he calls this
Andrew,
the Great White Whale. He said
right?
this is
Yeah,
the Great White
you
Whale. This was Moby Dick, because when he met me finally, he was like, "You caught the Great White Whale." Uh, yeah. So
exactly, and he's and Denzel was like, "I'm in." And
yeah,
once Denzel says he's in on something, he's in.
he's in,
He
and
is
he
he's
sent it right.
somebody
When we found out Denzel was in, we also found out Spike Lee was in. Like,
right,
because he sent it to
because
Spike Lee halfway through
to,
reading it, is what we were told.
exactly, he was halfway through the script. He saw that it was New York. He saw that it was music, and in his mind, he hadn't worked with Denzel, or he hadn't worked with Spike in over 20 years, and he's like, I'm sure he was like, who's better to do this than Spike Lee?
Yeah.
And so Denzel is the one who sent Spike the script,
Yeah.
and then told Todd and I afterwards that he had sent it to him.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, that's I don't know, man. It's crazy, because I want to tell one story that about what Jack has taught me and how I incorporated that into High and Low. But I'm also so fascinated. I don't think enough people understand the type of legwork that goes into producing movies. You know what I mean? And I think it's incredible to hear a story like this, because like nothing, like, I don't know, Jack and I love to talk about this, so we'll talk about it here now too. It's like a creative idea is constantly unfolding. It's constantly changing, right? It's like this thing started in the 50s as a kernel of an idea for a novel. And King's Ransom, when compared to High and Low, which compared to our version of Highest to Lowest, they're all very different. Like King's Ransom is white guys, and I think it's like I read it. It's kind of just like a business kind of. I forget even what business he does. Like I don't know if you remember anything
He
about it,
sets
but
in it. What's and it's also has to do with like a precinct with a
yeah,
police station.
yeah.
I forgot what he was doing though.
Yeah. Well, so at some point, Kurosawa reads this and he says, like, this setup is perfect for what I'd like to explore in Japan in the 60s. And I know the thing that, because when I got the job, I went back and read about what Kurosawa was thinking when he was making High and Low. Because the one thing I wanted to try to capture was figure out like what was in the spirit of what he was trying to do and how can I incorporate that into our reimagining, if you will, right? As like Spike Lee has said, it's a reimagining, not a remake. And one thing that Kurosawa talked about in his was he wanted to capture that feeling of early capitalism in Japan and what that was doing to people. And you can kind of see that reflected in the kidnapping plot and the literally the personification of like the poor person and the high person living in the tower, right? High and low. It's like, I think in Japanese, the actual title translated to heaven and hell. And it was interesting because like to him that was his statement about capitalism in the early, I think it was the early 60s when it was just
Yeah,
earlier late when it was just taking off in Japan. And this was like his statement about that was
that's
so
right.
it was so elegantly set up in the, I think his name was, yeah, Ed McBain or whatever, it was his pen name, set up in his novel, right? And then when we, it's like you can speak to this too. You see 20 years of scripts and it's
Right.
everything, I remember like Mamet did a version about an immigrant, like a I think it was probably a Hispanic immigrant and like a wealthy Irish family or something. Like there were all these
Yeah.
different types of things. Like Chris Rock did a version about this African American boxer. It's like, but this happens all the time in Hollywood where like everyone's trying to figure out how does this story connect to my experience and how can I sort of reflect my experience through the story. And that's what's so interesting, right? And that's why when it felt to me like, it was cool to get this opportunity because I had had this experience in my early 20s in the hip hop business. And I'd never, I don't necessarily look like the guy that might have been telling that story, but it was something that I had lived in and experienced. And to me also, it was just a story about, like, for Denzel, at least, like letting go of your ego. And I don't mean Denzel the person, I mean the character. And that's what I was going through at the time when I was writing it, right? It's like I had been humbled by life very deeply, and you gave me
Yeah.
this opportunity to like release my ego a little bit and do something like this. But anyways, man, I find that part so fascinating. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, you can speak to this. Is there another project that has had a history quite like this? Like because I don't think anyone ever knows these kind of
I
things about Hollywood.
I will tell you. I mean, this is really like this was a book that had a movie that then a reimagining that literally took like over 30 years in development to get made. I don't think so. I don't think that that there's not a project that I'm aware of that there was like a remake or a reimagining of that was based off of a book
Yeah.
that that was a foreign film that had this level of longevity of development, because in essence it's basically, if the book was written in the 50s, right, like it's 75 years
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is a long period of time with this specific type of like journey. Now it does take movies a lot of time to get made, but there's a lot of specifics to this in
Yeah.
terms of it being a Japanese film based off of a US book that then went through a long period of American development to then bring
Yeah.
it to life. And here's the other thing. A lot of filmmakers don't want to remake other filmmakers' movies. They
Particularly
don't.
particularly
And and
Kurosawa.
particularly Kurosawa. And that was the thing. Like, Spike was a massive Kurosawa fan.
Yeah.
He has a signed, picture from that Kurosawa had written out to Spike before Kurosawa had passed away. And Spike was open to, to doing a reimagining of a Kurosawa movie, which
Yeah.
a lot of filmmakers wouldn't want to do.
Yeah.
Right. So like it also fits something that Spike was excited about doing and putting
Yeah.
his own spin and point of view on as a
Yeah.
director. And so, and it lined up obviously with, with the point and the angle of your screenplay that, that
Yeah.
is the reason Denzel thought of Spike for it.
Yeah.
Um, so it's been a really incredible journey. And I think that's, for me, I love the journey of things. And like
Yeah.
you talk about, time is a circle, and I'm now obviously starting to see the patterns in things about journeys, and specifically things about journeys in my own life. And this is just something, the process of bringing this to life, and then
Yeah.
obviously doing it with a really, with you, a really good who's a really great friend, and such a great collaborator and artist. It's been amazing. Like, it's
Yeah.
been incredible. And I think that what I'm so excited about is, like, we created an opportunity, right, by I getting the rights, and you coming up with this great idea and working on it together, that ultimately created an opportunity for
Yeah.
two of the most prolific uh, artists of our time, in Denzel and Spike, to reunite together on their fifth film. And they
Yeah.
hadn't made a film since Inside Man, which was in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And that was something that, we jointly did together, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there was a lot of other people that were a part of that process and helping to make it happen. um but it wouldn't have happened without the two of us. And I think that is something that is really special, and is also part of what makes this stick out beyond its 75 years of a journey to bringing the reimagining of an adaptation of a book to life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally, man. I think why I wanted to make sure people understood this story, particularly what do you do from your side of it, right? Is I think just as someone who loved Hollywood, right? As someone who loved movie making, I think sometimes we don't understand enough about the process of actually getting movies made and how that actually works. And something like this, it's like, remakes and IP, like, it's weird. It's like a double-edged sword because like it gets kind of a bad name. Everyone's like, "Oh, why does Hollywood keep remaking everything?" And then on the flip side, it's like, well, having this built-in sort of brand helps studios kind of protect their investment. It's like you can see both sides of it, right? But one thing I think
Yeah.
is cool about High and Low is not just, from Ed McBain back in the 50s writing a novel to Spike Lee making Highest to Lowest in 2025. It's like each iteration of this, let's call it a standard, each iteration was different and spoke to the thing in the person making it, right? It's like, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but like when you guys came to me and I got this opportunity, initially I had just thought about it from the music perspective. Oh, that's my way in, right? I wanted to see like American Gangster Denzel meets Training Day Denzel. Like I had my own fantasy about what I could do with this for Denzel Washington. But then I read about what Kurosawa was trying to do with early capitalism in Japan. And I was like, man, what does that say about America now? Right. And I don't want to talk a lot about the movie because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But like, there's a line that's in the trailers and I think is throughout the movie, which is like, attention is the only currency left. And that I think speaks to like late capitalism and our culture. And so that's like where the
Hmm.
whole origin of how this thing plays out came from, was being like, oh man, like at the time in Japan when Kurosawa saw a great setup for what he wanted to say about capitalism. Maybe I can try to do the same thing with different pieces as a different person. And like, in the music business, to keep it on the music business, there's things called standards. And it used to, people will sing the same songs or people will sample songs. It's like hip hop was built on sampling. The movie business, like I think there's a world where we can accept the fact, the theater, like if Jack were here, he'd tell you, right? Like everyone does their own version of Macbeth, their own version of Othello. And like, yes, people will judge, it's like people saw Denzel's Othello and they judged it against the Othello they had seen back in 1986 somewhere. But I just think like with High and Low is such an interesting example because I think the old scripts like really show it, where everyone had a different take on this very simple
Yeah.
premise, which is
And
set up, kidnapping. What's he gonna do? You know?
yeah, more, what's the moral decision that he's
Yeah,
gonna what's the decision
yeah,
he's gonna make? But also, like, our version, because you talk about, you know, I want to be involved in making movies that have a social and cultural relevancy to them,
hmm,
and an urgency, right? And I think, honestly, that's what most storytellers have
yeah,
wanted to do. I think,
yeah,
what Nina Simone's famous quote was, art's like a reflection of the times,
yeah,
something along those lines. And
hmm,
um, and so in our version of High and Low and Highest to Lowest, technology is something that's utilized a lot in the movie, in
yeah,
terms of, the conceit of the record label and the other label, and also, the way in which the kidnapping happens and the way in which people are, the way in which Instagram is used and social media is used. That's
Yeah.
a part of this version of the movie, which
Yeah.
is something that we're all dealing with right now, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's like technology has become so present. And I think even if you look at the theater space, I mean, if you look at the new version of Sunset Boulevard, which has been doing so well, which launched in London and
Yeah.
now is in New York, technology is heavily used in the storytelling of
Yeah.
of that.
What's
And so even
interesting
in
though, what's interesting, man, I'll stop you there. What's interesting about that is like you pointing that out. It's funny because I remember when Spike Lee, when he got my draft of the script and goes off and does his thing, because that's, it's just like the chain of how it works, right? He's going to make his movie. I know, like, when I saw it, there's a different like I had a sort of a different viewpoint in my script about technology, right? And it's funny because what you're saying about technology in the theater, Jack has gotten on here and said, like, I don't understand why. Like, it's just interesting because you get to see the sort of generational shifts, and High and Low's about that in a lot of ways. Is that
right.
generational observation on technology and fame and that sort of thing. But continue about the theater. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I mean, the director behind Sunset Boulevard, Jamie Lloyd, I mean, he's really using technology in
Yeah.
his theater performances,
Yeah.
which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's engaging. Like, if it's used the right way, I think that's the thing. It's like if we can utilize technology in the right way and things that we're that we're doing, it can be great. It can also be something that can, be a deterrent. So it's interesting, because you talk about like really what part of what Kurosawa was trying to make a statement about in Japan and colonialism at the time he was making High and Low.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you had your point of view in technology in, what you wrote, and then Spike had his point about technology and what he
Yeah.
ultimately directed. But there's still that same theme, right? Like
Yeah.
this
Totally.
reinterpretation of highest to lowest, technology plays a part in it,
Yeah.
and
Totally.
in the storytelling aspect of it.
Totally.
And I just think it's like, art evolves, right? And we're in this world right now where it's like we have tools that they did not have in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And
Yeah.
so it's like, how are they to be utilized in storytelling?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been such an amazing journey in bringing this thing to life with you, and just and how it's evolved. I think one of the things that I love about, this podcast that you have with Jack is you're talking about the process.
Yeah.
And I think, we've just talked about the process of this,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
there's always those stories, because process isn't always the thing that's the most sellable, right?
Yeah.
Or the most, like, that gets the most ad dollars, or there's the most interesting message to put out there, but yet it is the foundational aspect of how things come to life and how also people evolve too.
Yeah.
Is going through processes. And
Yeah.
we went through a process on bringing this to life, and I think we learned
Yeah.
a lot from it.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the thing you feel like you learned the most through this process?
It's You've got to always keep your North Star the same, and then always try to be a really good, when you're working with keep the bringing the movie to life when you're setting out as a producer, is the most important thing, right? That's got to be the North Star, is like is protecting the project and the movie. And so, I learned that was key.
Yeah.
And to just, keep persevering. But also that when you're working in the field of artists and bringing movies to life, and it's the movie business, right? It's show business. It's not
Yeah.
show. It's show business. It's the
Yeah.
movie business. So you've got the art, and you've got, the commerce part of it. And as a producer with something that's as high stakes as this, because this was a big budget film, and there were a lot of very, a lot of very high level artists involved in it. As a producer, you also really have to learn how to navigate that, and all the personalities,
Yeah.
and how to try to do it in the best way that you can for what's ultimately in the best interest of the movie.
Yeah.
And as the producer, you're kind of the nexus of that, because you're dealing with everybody. And so
Yeah.
you have to be a grand facilitator,
Yeah.
and mediator. And you know, everything that I've done, the other 30 movies that I had made in my career, and what I had learned through going through that journey is what ultimately prepared me to succeed in on this journey.
Yeah.
And so, and this kind of epitomized that. But yet, I learned so much on this journey because it was at such a higher stake level than anything else that I had done.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't done all those smaller independent films along the way, I wouldn't have been prepared to do that on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I learned that. And you say, what did you learn? Well, taking that role on a movie and being and I think hopefully being good at it is a really important aspect to being able to see something through to fruition,
Yeah.
and completion. And
Yeah.
that's the big takeaway.
Cool. Sounds like a great thing to take away, man. And I'm gonna we're way over time, but I'm gonna wrap up quickly with the thing I promised I was gonna do. Maybe I promised it out loud. Maybe I just promised it in my mind. But we've been doing mentors, right? And you've been listening. We've been doing mentors about Jack's been talking about his mentors and what he's learned. And quickly, I wanted to say one of Jack's favorite things, and this is something I learned from Jack that I put into use with High and Low when I was developing it with you guys. Because really, what we're talking about is that window of time from like you getting the option to me handing it off to kind of Denzel and Spike, right? It's like, because then they sort of take the show over. But in this in between phase, it was so funny, man, because I wrote, and again, I don't want to talk too much right now about what happens in the movie, but I wrote this whole thing I was so passionate about. And I read Kurosawa's autobiography and I watched the movie. I was like, oh, I captured this thing. Like, he would be happy with this, all this kind of stuff. And I'll never forget, I sent in the draft. I think it was the second one. I sent it to you, or the second one. Maybe you read a pre one. You and Jordan read a pre one, and then I sent in like the official one to Todd and everything. You guys really love it, blah blah blah. I went to LA to get notes and be in person with you guys to then work on a sort of small rewrite. And I'll never forget Todd telling me like, I don't know about the ending. And again, I don't want to give away too much, but basically, Todd Black and you and your the guy you work with, Jordan Maldo, like you guys were like, we're not sure if it ends the way it needs to for this kind of movie, basically, is what you were saying. And I had in the past on scripts, I had made changes when people had asked me to, and I didn't feel the conviction. I had made compromises that I didn't feel were right. And I was so defensive. Other changes
Yeah.
you guys had, I was fine with. That change about the ending, I was so defensive. And maybe one day I can tell everyone what it is, but I was like, no, this is what Kurosawa would have wanted. Like, this is how it's supposed to end. I'm like talking about how poetic it is and like so up my own butt about like whatever I'm trying to do, right? It's so stupid. And I'll just never forget Todd being like, all right, but I'm telling you, like, I've been in these test screenings with Denzel's audience in Long Beach. They're not going to like your ending. And I'll never forget, man. I walked away from that experience and I thought about what Jack always said, which is just try it. And I remember Jack loves to say that, and he's told that story on here before. Like, what he'll tell actors that are defensive is like, well, why don't you just try it? Like, let's just see what happens. Just try it. And I'll never forget, leaving you guys and being all like, moping around LA, like they don't get it, they're not artists. And literally, man, I thought about Jack, just try it. And so I did. And, you can vouch for this. I basically rewrote two endings that were like,
Yeah.
I rewrote
Yeah.
scenes. I was like, we'll look at both of them. And I think Todd had brought that up too, saying, let's look at both of them. And man, I'll never forget, like, thinking to myself, like, oh, is this what Kurosawa would want? And then I started thinking, like, he probably doesn't like my version anyway. He's like, I don't listen to hip hop, man. What are you talking about? So I don't know, but I'll never forget like doing that and thinking about Jack, just try it. And it ended up you guys were right, man. We went with the Long Beach Denzel's audience ending, and he loved it. So you guys were right, man. And I'm not too prideful to say you guys were right. I'm glad Jack was right about trying it because it all worked out.
And the one last thing I'll say is part of what I think great artists do and great writers, and you definitely epitomize this to the highest level, is that you did all of your homework before you set out to write the script. You had watched all of Denzel's movies, like you had read previous
That was for
drafts of
fun, though, man.
scripts. You had, I know, but you learned what Denzel did that worked, and like you read about Akira Kurosawa, and like you went into it from a very also intellectual standpoint of like having a real foundational understanding of the history of what it was that you were embarking on and who it, and the Denzel of it all. And I think that, you know, that is part of the reason that, like, on the very first read, when the script was shared with Denzel, he was like,
Yeah.
I want to do this, because
Yeah.
you did the homework, you know. And it's not just about going out and setting out to just write or create something. It's about doing the homework before you start that process. And
Yeah.
and you definitely did that homework, and you did it in a very deep dig way,
Well,
and
at the end of the
that's
day, man,
admirable.
I appreciate you saying that, man. But also, like, at the end of the day, and I remember last time I was in LA doing meetings, I was telling everyone this. I was like, dude, a screenwriter is a problem solver. They're not a
Right.
artist. They can be right. You can do something more artistic, but like, let's be honest, man. Writing a screenplay is in many ways being a problem solver, and particularly for Highest to Lowest, where, you know, High and Low, which turned into Highest to Lowest, so people know we're not calling it different things all the time. It's like it's the titles changed, but um, you guys had a problem. We're like, look, we have these pieces. We have, you know, one of the greatest actors of all time. We have this IP. We have this iconic Japanese film. It's like, we want to figure out how to make something cool and contemporary. So I then come back and I say, okay, like, how do I build the thing they need? And I, you know, Jack and I have talked about this before. I think that breeds more creativity. I think sometimes whenever you don't have
Yeah.
any, when you don't have any lines on your paper and you just start doing
Yep.
colors, it's kind of a mess. But if you have the outline and you start to color it in, you can make something kind of cool. And so I see it as a problem solver, a lot like you. You had a big problem when you know,
Yeah.
like when you went to Matt Lindner and you said, "Hey, man, I need 150 grand to do all this prop." Like, that's what you had. You had problems, and you did a great job as well of just like, how do I, you know, your version of doing the homework, knowing what's going on and solving problems, because that's kind of what we do, you know?
Yeah. And by the way, a lot of the best movies, and a lot of the best independent films that have been made are at the level of quality that they are, because filmmakers have to figure out how to make them work within real
Yeah,
confines.
yeah,
You know, they don't have endless amounts of money.
yeah,
They don't have endless locations. Like, and so, like you said, problem solving sometimes leads to the absolute best art.
yeah,
And we've seen that in some of the greatest independent
yeah,
films that have been made. And just having come from that independent world, I've had a firsthand in witnessing that with artists. So
yeah,
it's so true.
yeah. Yeah, man. I'm sure Jack would say too. It's the same in the theater. It's the same with everything, man. It's the same with life. Life's just problem
100%.
solving. Um, Amazing. All right, dude. Well, why don't we wrap up there? Because this is like the longest episode ever. But it was great, and I'm glad people got to hear it. And yeah.
Yeah.
So Highest Lowest comes out in theaters August. I think I said August the 11th. That's not right. It's August the 15th.
It's August 15th in
Yeah.
theaters,
Yeah.
and then on September 5th on Apple TV Plus.
Amazing. And yeah, dude. Well, Jason, thanks for joining us, man. Everyone, this is once again, this is super producer Berman, being our special fill-in for the Notes with Jack podcast. And as we love to say on this podcast, we love you, Berman. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Alan.
And yeah, man. And yeah, Jack will be back with us next week, and we'll get into the Sound of Music, everyone. We're gonna start full-fledged Sound of Music starting next week, and we'll I'm sure we'll have some problem solving in that.
I love how you're going to be going from highest to lowest to the Sound of Music. It's brilliant.
Yeah, dude, we cover all the bases, man. So so yeah, that's what we got. I guess that's enough. All right, thanks, man. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and
Thank you.
we'll talk to you next week. Bye bye.